Hello there, everyone, and welcome to a random and impromptu reading of chapter 15 of In Search of the Miraculous by Ouspensky. There's only 4 more chapters remaining of In Search of the Miraculous, including this one, and then there'll be plenty more Gurdjieff content coming up. And so, I'm just going to speak briefly about what's coming up in this chapter. Then I'll go over the contents very quickly, which are also in the description. You can find them. But this chapter is very interesting because we learn about Gurdjieff's views on religion generally. And then he speaks about Christianity in particular. He also then goes on to talk about prayer and repetition, the mantra we call it, where you're just repeating things. Then he moves on to speak about is there an external force guiding humanity, and the 2 different divisions of esoteric schools and exoteric, or I think he calls it mesoteric, but anyway, exoteric and esoteric, which Alice Bailey talks a lot about. She talks about her hierarchy, and I suppose these are Gurdjieff's views on the hierarchy. So yes, I'll share the contents and then we'll get right into the reading. Like I say, only 4 more chapters to go, including this one, and I think we'll be reading some of Gurdjieff's own writing next. So this is the contents of chapter 15. Religion a relative concept. Religions correspond to the level of man's being. Can prayer help? Learning to pray. General ignorance regarding Christianity. The Christian Church a school, Egyptian schools of repetition, significance of rites, the techniques of religion, where does the word I sound in one, the 2 parts of real religion and what each teaches, Kant and the idea of scale, organic life on earth, growth of the ray of creation, the moon, the evolving part of organic life is humanity. Humanity is at a standstill, which many of us might feel in today's age. Change possible only at crossroads. The process of evolution always begins with the formation of a conscious nucleus. Is there a conscious force fighting against evolution? Is mankind evolving? 200 conscious people could change the whole of life on earth. 3 inner circles of humanity, the outer circle, the 4 ways as gates to the exoteric circle, schools of the 4th way, pseudo-esoteric systems and schools, truth in the form of life, in the form of a lie, esoteric schools in the East, initiation and the mysteries, only self-initiation is possible. And so all that's coming up in chapter 15 of In Search of the Miraculous by Ouspensky. As always, please feel free to share any questions or queries or anything that you might like me to speak more about. But for now, let's get right into the text. Among the talks of the period I am describing, that is, the end of 1916, G several times touched upon questions of religion. And when anyone asked him anything connected with religion, G invariably began by emphasizing the fact that there is something very wrong at the basis of our usual attitude towards problems of religion. In the first place, he always said, religion is a relative concept. It corresponds to the level of man's being, and one man's religion might not be at all suitable for another man. That is to say, the religion of a man of one level of being is not suitable for a man of another level of being. It must be understood that the religion of man number 1 is of one kind, the religion of man number 2 is of another kind, and the religion of man number 3 is of a third kind. The religion of man number 4, number 5, and further is something of a kind totally different from the religion of man number 1, number 2, and number 3. In the second place, religion is doing. A man does not merely think his religion or feel it, he lives his religion as much as he is able, otherwise it is not religion but fantasy or philosophy. Whether he likes it or not, he shows his attitude towards religion by his action, and he can show his attitude only by his actions. Therefore, if his actions are opposed to those which are demanded by a given religion, he cannot assert that he belongs to that religion. The vast majority of people who call themselves Christians have no right whatever to do so, because they not only fail to carry out the demands of their religion, but they do not even think that these demands ought to be carried out. Christianity forbids murder, Yet all that the whole of our progress comes to is progress in the technique of murder and progress in warfare. How can we call ourselves Christians? No one has a right to call himself a Christian who does not carry out Christ's precepts. A man can say that he desires to be a Christian if he tries to carry out these precepts, if he does not think of them at all, or laughs at them, or substitutes for them some inventions of his own, or simply forgets about them. He has no right whatever to call himself a Christian. I took the example of war as it is the most striking example, but even without war the whole of life is exactly the same. People call themselves Christians, but they do not realize that not only do they not want, but they are unable to be Christians, because in order to be a Christian it is necessary not only to desire, but to be able to be one. Man in himself is not one. He is not I, he is we, or to speak more correctly, he is they. Everything arises from this. Let us suppose that a man decides according to the Gospels to turn the left cheek if somebody strikes him on the right cheek. But one eye decides this either in the mind or in the emotional center. One eye knows of it, one eye remembers it, the others do not. Let us imagine that it actually happens, that somebody strikes this man. Do you think he will turn the left cheek? Never. He will not even have time to think about it. He will either strike the face of the man who struck him, or he will begin to call a policeman, or he will simply take to flight. His moving center will react in its customary way, or as it has been taught to react, before the man realizes what he is doing. Prolonged instruction, prolonged training is necessary to be able to turn the cheek, and if this training is mechanical, it is again worth nothing, because in this case it means that a man can turn his cheek because he cannot do anything else. Cannot prayer help a man to live like a Christian? Asked someone. It depends upon whose prayer, said G. The prayer of subjective man, that is, of man number 1, number 2, and number 3, can give only subjective results, namely self-consolation, self-suggestion, self-hypnosis. It cannot give objective results. But cannot prayer in general give objective results? Asked one of those present. I have already said, it depends upon whose prayer, G replied. One must learn to pray, just as one must learn everything else. Whoever knows how to pray and is able to concentrate in the proper way, his prayer can give results. But it must be understood that there are different prayers and that their results are different. This is known even from ordinary divine service. But when we speak of prayer or the results of prayer, we always imply one kind of prayer, petition, or we think that petition can be united with all other kinds of prayers. This, of course, is not true. Most prayers have nothing in common with petitions. I speak of ancient prayers. Many of them are much older than Christianity. These prayers are, so to speak, recapitulations. By repeating them aloud or to himself, a man endeavors to experience what is in them, their whole content, with his mind and his feeling. And a man can always make new prayers for himself. For example, a man says, I want to be serious, but the whole point is in how he says it. If he repeats it even 10,000 times a day and is thinking of how soon he will finish and what will there be for dinner and the like, then it is not prayer, but simply self-deceit. But it can become a prayer if man recites the prayer in this way. He says, I, and tries at the same time to think of everything he knows about I. It does not exist. There is no single I. There is a multitude of petty, clamorous, quarrelsome I's. But he wants to be one I, the master. He recalls the carriage, the horse, the driver, and the master. I is master. Want. He thinks of the meaning of I want. Is he able to want? With him it wants, or it does not want all the time. But to this it wants and it does not want, he strives to oppose his own I want, which is connected with the aims of work on himself, that is, to introduce the third force into the customary combination of the two forces, it wants and it does not want. To be. The man thinks of what to be, what being means. The being of a mechanical man with whom everything happens. The being of a man who can do. It is possible to be in different ways. He wants to be not merely in the sense of existence, but in the sense of greatness of power. The words to be acquire weight a new meaning for him. Serious. The man thinks what it means to be serious. How he answers himself is very important. If he understands what this means, if he defines correctly for himself what it means to be serious and feels that he truly desires it, then his prayer can give a result in the sense that strength can be added to him, that he will more often notice when he is not serious, that he will overcome himself more easily, make himself be serious. In exactly the same way, a man can pray, I want to remember myself. To remember. What does to remember mean? The man must think about memory, how little he remembers, how often he forgets what he has decided, what he has seen, what he knows. His whole life would be different if he could remember. All ills come because he does not remember. Myself. Again, he returns to himself. Which self does he want to remember? Is it worthwhile remembering the whole of himself? How can he distinguish what he wants to remember? The idea of work, how can he connect himself with the idea of the work, and so on and so on. In Christian worship there are very many prayers exactly like this, where it is necessary to reflect upon each word, but they lose all sense and all meaning when they are repeated or sung mechanically. Take the ordinary, God have mercy upon me. What does it mean? A man is appealing to God. He should think a little. He should make a comparison and ask himself what God is and what he is. Then he is asking God to have mercy upon him. But for this, God must first of all think of him, take notice of him. But is it worthwhile taking notice of him? What is there in him that is worth thinking about? And who is to think about him? God himself? You see, all these thoughts and yet many others should pass through his mind when he utters this simple prayer. And then it is precisely these thoughts which could do for him what he asks God to do. But what can he be thinking of, and what results can a prayer give if he merely repeats like a parrot, God have mercy, God have mercy, God have mercy? You know yourselves, this can give no result whatever. Generally speaking, we know very little about Christianity and the form of Christian worship. We know nothing at all of the history and origin of a number of things. For instance, the church, the temple in which gather the faithful and in which services are carried out according to special rites. Where was this taken from? Many people do not think about this at all. Many people think that the outward form of worship, the rites, the singing of canticles and so on, were invented by the fathers of the church. Others think that this outward form has been taken partly from pagan religions and partly from the Hebrews, but all of it is untrue. The question of the origin of the Christian church, that is, of the Christian temple, is much more interesting than we think. To begin with, the church and worship in the form which they took in the first centuries of Christianity could not have been borrowed from paganism because there was nothing like it either. In the Greek or Roman cults of To begin with, the church and worship in the form which they took in the first centuries of Christianity could not have been borrowed from paganism because there was nothing like it either in the Greek or Roman cults or in Judaism. The Jewish synagogue, the Jewish temple, Greek and Roman temples of various gods were something quite different from the Christian church which made its appearance in the first and second centuries. The Christian church is a school concerning which people have forgotten that it is a school. Imagine a school where the teachers give lectures and perform explanatory demonstrations without knowing that these are lectures and demonstrations. And where the pupils, or simply the people who come to the school, take these lectures and demonstrations for ceremonies, or rites, or sacraments, i.e. magic. This would approximate to the Christian church of our times. The Christian church, the Christian form of worship, was not invented by the fathers of the church. It was all taken in a ready-made form from Egypt, only not from the Egypt that we know, but from one which we do not know. This Egypt was in the same place as the other, but it existed much earlier. Only small bits of it survived in historical times, and these bits have been preserved in secret, and so well that we do not even know where they have been preserved. It will seem strange to many people when I say that prehistoric Egypt was Christian many thousands of years before the birth of Christ, that is to say, that its religion was composed of the same principles and ideas that constitute true Christianity. Special schools existed in this prehistoric Egypt, which were called schools of repetition. In these schools, a public repetition was given on definite days, and in some schools, perhaps even every day, of the entire course in a condensed form of the sciences that could be learned at these schools. Sometimes this repetition lasted a week or a month. Thanks to these repetitions, people who had passed through this course did not lose their connection with the school and retained in their memory all they had learned. Sometimes they came from very far away, simply in order to listen to the repetition, and went away feeling their connection with the school. There were special days of the year when the repetitions were particularly complete, when they were carried out with particular solemnity, and these days themselves possessed a symbolical meaning. These schools of repetition were taken as a model for Christian churches. The form of worship in Christian churches almost entirely represents the course of repetition of the science dealing with the universe and man. Individual prayers, hymns, responses, all had their own meaning in this repetition, as well as holidays and all religious symbols, though their meaning has been forgotten long ago. Hello there, Amy Jones. I'm glad you're enjoying the readings and my voice. I'm happy to hear that. Continuing, G quoted some very interesting examples of the explanations of various parts of Orthodox liturgy. Unfortunately, no notes were made at the time, and I will not undertake to reconstruct them from memory. The idea was that, beginning with the first words, the liturgy, so to speak, goes through the process of creation, recording all its stages and transitions. What particularly astonished me in G's explanations was the extent to which so much has been preserved in its pure form, and how little we understand of all this. His explanations differed very greatly from the usual theological and even from mystical interpretations, and the principal difference was that he did away with a great many allegories. I mean to say that it became obvious from his explanations that we take many things for allegories in which there is no allegory whatever, and which ought to be understood much more simply and psychologically. What he said before about the Last Supper serves as a good example of this. Every ceremony or rite has a value if it is performed without alteration, he said. A ceremony is a book in which a great deal is written. Anyone who understands can read it. One rite often contains more than 100 books. Indicating what had been preserved up to our time, G at the same time pointed out what had been lost and forgotten. He spoke of sacred dances which accompanied the services in the temples of repetition, and which were not included in the Christian form of worship. He also spoke of various exercises and of special postures for different prayers, that is, for different kinds of meditation, about acquiring control over the breathing, and of the necessity of being able to tense or relax any group of muscles, or the muscles of the whole body at will, and about many other things having relation, so to speak, to the technique of religion. On one occasion, in connection with the description of exercises in concentration and bringing the attention from one part of the body to another, G asked, "When you pronounce the word I aloud, have you noticed where this word sounds in you?" We did not at once understand what he meant, but we very soon began to notice that when pronouncing the word I, some of us definitely felt as if this word sounded in the head, others felt it in the chest, and others over the head, outside the body. I must mention here that personally I was entirely unable to evoke this sensation in myself, and that I have to rely on others. G listened to all these remarks and said that there was an exercise connected with this which, according to him, had been preserved up to our time in the monasteries of Mount Athos. A monk kneels or stands in a certain position and, lifting his arms, which are bent at the elbows, he says, "Ego," aloud and drawn out, while listening at the same time where the word ego sounds. The purpose of this exercise is to feel I every moment a man thinks of himself, and to bring I from one center to another. G many times pointed out the necessity of studying this forgotten technique, as well as the impossibility of attaining results of any kind on the way of religion without it, accepting purely subjective results. You must understand, he said, that every real religion, that is, one that has been created by learned people for a definite aim, consists of two parts. One part teaches what is to be done. This part becomes common knowledge and, in the course of time, is distorted and departs from the original. The other part teaches how to do what the first part teaches. This part is preserved in secret in special schools, and with its help it is always possible to rectify what has been distorted in the first part, or to restore what has been forgotten. Without this second part, there can be no knowledge of religion, or in any case, such knowledge would be incomplete and very subjective. This secret part exists in Christianity also, as well as in other religions, and it teaches how to carry out the precepts of Christ and what they really mean. I must quote here still one more talk with G, once again in connection with cosmoses. This is connected with Kant's idea of phenomenon and noumena. Phenomena and noumena, I said. But after all this is... I'll start that paragraph again. I must quote here still one more talk with G, once again in connection with cosmoses. This is connected with Kant's idea of phenomena and noumena, I said, but after all this is the whole point. The earth as a three-dimensional body is the phenomenon, as a six-dimensional body the noumenon. Perfectly true, said G, only add here also the idea of scale. If Kant had introduced the idea of scale into his arguments, many things he wrote would be very valuable. This was the only thing he lacked. I thought while listening to G that Kant would have been very surprised at this pronouncement, but the idea of scale was very near to me, and I realized that with this as a starting point it was possible to find very much that is new and unexpected in things which we think we know. About a year afterwards, while developing the ideas of the cosmoses in connection with problems of time, I obtained a table of time in different cosmoses, of which I will speak later on. On one occasion, when speaking of the orderly connectedness of everything in the universe, G dwelt on organic life on Earth. To ordinary knowledge, he said, organic life is a kind of accidental appendage violating the integrity of a mechanical system. Ordinary knowledge does not connect it with anything and draws no conclusions from the fact of its existence. But you should already understand that there is nothing accidental or unnecessary in nature, and that there can be nothing. Everything has a definite function. Everything serves a definite purpose. Thus, organic life is an indispensable link in the chain of the worlds which cannot exist without it, just as it cannot exist without them. It has been said before that organic life transmits planetary influences of various kinds to the earth, and that it serves to feed the moon and to enable it to grow and strengthen. But the earth also is growing, not in the sense of size, but in the sense of greater consciousness, greater receptivity. The planetary influences which were sufficient for her at one period of her existence become insufficient. She needs the reception of finer influences. To receive finer influences, a finer, more sensitive, receptive apparatus is necessary. Organic life, therefore, has to evolve, to adapt itself to the needs of the planets and to the earth. Likewise also the moon can be satisfied at one period with the food which is given her by organic life of a certain quality, but afterwards the time comes when she ceases to be satisfied with this food, cannot grow on it, and begins to get hungry. Organic life must be able to satisfy this hunger, otherwise it does not fulfill its function, does not answer its purpose. This means that in order to answer its purpose, organic life must evolve and stand on the level of the needs of the planets, the earth, and the moon. We must remember that the ray of creation, as we have taken it, from the absolute to the moon, is like a branch of a tree, a growing branch. The end of this branch, the end out of which come new shoots, is the moon. If the moon does not grow, if it neither gives nor promises to give new shoots, it means that either the growth of the whole ray of creation will stop, or that it must find another path for its growth, give out some kind of lateral branch. At the same time, from what has been said before, we see that the growth of the moon depends on organic life on Earth. It follows that the growth of the ray of creation depends on organic life on Earth. If this organic life disappears or dies, the whole branch will immediately wither, in any case, all that part of the branch which lies beyond organic life. The same thing must happen, only more slowly, if organic life is arrested in its development, in its evolution, and fails to respond to the demands made upon it. The branch may wither. This must be remembered. To the ray of creation, or let us say to its part Earth-Moon, exactly the same possibility of development and growth has been given as is given to each separate branch of a big tree. But the accomplishment of this growth is not at all guaranteed. It depends upon the harmonious and right action of its own tissues. The development of one tissue stops, and all the others stop. Everything that can be said of the ray of creation or of its part Earth-Moon equally refers to organic life on Earth. Organic life on Earth is a complex phenomenon in which the separate parts depend upon one another. General growth is possible only on the condition that the end of the branch grows. Or, speaking more precisely, there are in organic life tissues which are evolving, and there are tissues which serve as food and medium for those which are evolving. Then there are evolving cells within the evolving tissues, and cells which serve as food and medium for those which are evolving. In each separate evolving cell there are evolving parts, and there are parts which serve as food for those which are evolving. But always and in everything it must be remembered that evolution is never guaranteed. It is possible only, and it can stop at any moment, and in any place. The evolving part of organic life is humanity. Humanity also has its evolving part, but we will speak of this later. In the meantime, we will take humanity as a whole. If humanity does not evolve, it means that the evolution of organic life will stop, and this in its turn will cause the growth of the ray of creation to stop. At the same time, if humanity ceases to evolve, it becomes useless from the point of view of the aims for which it was created, and as such, it may be destroyed. In this way, the cessation of evolution must mean the destruction of humanity. We have no clues from which we are able to tell in what period of planetary evolution we exist, and whether the moon and the earth have time to await the corresponding evolution of organic life or not. But people who know may, of course, have exact information about it, that is, they may know at what stage in their possible evolution are the earth, the moon, and humanity. We cannot know this, but we should bear in mind that the number of possibilities is never infinite. At the same time, in examining the life of humanity as we know it historically, we are bound to acknowledge that humanity is moving in a circle. In one century it destroys everything it creates in another, and the progress in mechanical things of the past 100 years has proceeded at the cost of losing many other things which perhaps were much more important for it. Speaking in general, there is every reason to think and to assert that humanity is at a standstill, and from a standstill there is a straight path to downfall and degeneration. A standstill means that a process has become balanced. The appearance of any one quality immediately evokes the appearance of another quality opposed to it. The growth of knowledge in one domain evokes the growth of ignorance in another. Refinement on the one hand evokes vulgarity on the other. Freedom in one connection evokes slavery in another. The disappearance of some superstitions evoke the appearance and the growth of others, and so on. Now, if we recall the law of octaves, we shall see that a balanced process proceeding in a certain way cannot be changed at any moment it is desired. It can be changed and set on a new path only at certain crossroads. In between the crossroads nothing can be done. At the same time, if a process passes by a crossroads and nothing happens, nothing is done. Then nothing can be done afterwards, and the process will continue and develop according to mechanical laws, and even if people taking part in this process foresee the inevitable destruction of everything, they will be unable to do anything. I repeat that something can be done only at a certain moments, which I have just called crossroads, and which in octaves we have called the intervals mi fa and si do. Of course, there are very many people who consider that the life of humanity is not proceeding in the way in which, according to their views, it ought to go, and they invent various theories which, in their opinion, ought to change the whole life of humanity. One invents one theory, another immediately invents a contradictory theory, and both expect everyone to believe them. And many people indeed do believe either one or the other. Life naturally takes its own course, but people do not stop believing in their own or other people's theories, and they believe that it is possible to do something. All these theories are certainly quite fantastic, chiefly because they do not take into account the most important thing, namely the subordinate part which humanity and organic life play in the world process. Intellectual theories put man in the center of everything. Everything exists for him, the sun, the stars, the moon, the earth. They even forget man's relative size, his nothingness, his transient existence, and other tilings. They assert that a man, if he wishes, is able to change his whole life, that is, to organize his life on rational principles. And all the time new theories appear, evoking in their turn opposing theories, and all these theories and the struggle between them undoubtedly constitute one of the forces which keep humanity in the state in which it is at present. Besides, all these theories for general welfare and general quality are not only unrealizable, but they would be fatal if they were realized. Everything in nature has its aim and its purpose, both the inequality of man and his suffering. To destroy inequality would mean destroying the possibility of evolution. To destroy suffering would mean first destroying a whole series of perceptions for which man exists, and second, the destruction of the shock, that is to say, the force which alone can change the situation, and thus it is with all intellectual theories. The process of evolution, of that evolution which is possible for humanity as a whole, is completely analogous to the process of evolution possible for the individual man. And it begins with the same thing, namely, a certain group of cells gradually becomes conscious. Then it attracts to itself other cells, subordinates others, and gradually makes the whole organism serve its aims and not merely eat, drink, and sleep. This is evolution, and there can be no other kind of evolution. In humanity, as in individual man, everything begins with the formation of a conscious nucleus. All the mechanical forces of life fight against the formation of this conscious nucleus in humanity in just the same way as all mechanical habits, tastes, and weaknesses fight against conscious self-remembering in man. Can it be said that there is a conscious force which fights against the evolution of humanity? I asked. From a certain point of view it can be said, said G. I'm putting this on record because it would seem to contradict what he said before, namely, that there are only two forces struggling in the world, consciousness and mechanicalness. Where can this force come from? I asked. It would take a long time to explain, said G, and it cannot have a practical significance for us at the present moment. There are two processes which are sometimes called involutionary and evolutionary. The difference between them is the following. An involutionary process begins consciously in the absolute, but at the next step it already becomes mechanical, and it becomes more and more mechanical as it develops. An evolutionary process begins half consciously, but it becomes more and more conscious as it develops. But consciousness and conscious opposition to the evolutionary process can also appear at certain moments in the involutionary process. From where does this consciousness come? From the evolutionary process, of course. The evolutionary process must proceed without interruption. Any stop causes a separation from the fundamental process. Such separate fragments of consciousnesses which have been stopped in their development can also unite, and at any rate for a certain time can live by struggling against the evolutionary process. After all, it merely makes the evolutionary process more interesting. Instead of struggling against mechanical forces, there may, at certain moments, be a struggle against the intentional opposition of fairly powerful forces, though they are not, of course, comparable with those which direct the evolutionary process. These opposing forces may sometimes even conquer. The reason for this consists in the fact that the forces guiding evolution have a more limited choice of means. In other words, they can only make use of certain means and certain methods. The opposing forces are not limited in their choice of means, and they are able to make use of every means, even those which only give rise to a temporary success, and in the final result they destroy both evolution and involution at the point in question. But as I have said already, this question has no practical significance for us. It is only important for us to establish the indications of evolution beginning and the indications of evolution proceeding. And if we remember the full analogy between humanity and man, it will not be difficult to establish whether humanity can be regarded as evolving. Are we able to say, for instance, that life is governed by a group of conscious people? Where are they? Who are they? We see exactly the opposite. The life is governed by those who are the least conscious, by those who are most asleep. And that's a pretty powerful paragraph there. I'm going to read it again because, this is sort of very important for where we are in, humanity's evolution, I suppose, to use the context of this chapter. Are we able to say, for instance, that life is governed by a group of conscious people? Where are they? Who are they? We see exactly the opposite, that life is governed by those who are the least conscious, by those who are most asleep. And if you've read Plato's Republic, you will learn about the philosopher kings and how humanity and society should be looked over by philosopher kings. And in his other dialogue, the statesman, he talks about the statesman and how we're very far from philosopher kings and statesmen in our current political culture. Are we able to say that we observe in life a preponderance of the best, the strongest, and the most courageous elements? Nothing of the sort. On the contrary, we see a preponderance of vulgarity and stupidity of all kinds. Are we able to say that aspirations towards unity, towards unification, can be observed in life? Nothing of the kind, of course. We only see new divisions, new hostility, new misunderstandings. So that in the actual situation of humanity there is nothing that points to evolution proceeding. On the contrary, when we compare humanity with the man, we quite clearly see a growth of personality at the cost of essence, that is, a growth of the artificial, the unreal, and what is foreign, at the cost of the natural, the real, and what is one's own. Together with this we see a growth of automatism. Contemporary culture requires automatons, and people are undoubtedly losing their acquired habits of independence and turning into automatons, into parts of machines. It is impossible to say where is the end of all this and where the way out, or whether there is an end and a way out. One thing alone is certain, that man's slavery grows and increases. Man is becoming a willing slave. He no longer needs chains. He begins to grow fond of his slavery, to be proud of it. And this is the most terrible thing that can happen to a man. Everything I have said till now I have said about the whole of humanity. But as I pointed out before, the evolution of humanity can proceed only through the evolution of a certain group, which in its turn will influence and lead the rest of humanity. Are we able to say that such a group exists? Perhaps we can on the basis of certain signs, but in any event we have to acknowledge that it is a very small group, quite insufficient at any rate, to subjugate the rest of humanity, Or, looking at it from another point of view, we can say that humanity is in such a state that it is unable to accept the guidance of a conscious group. How many people could there be in this conscious group? Someone asked. Only themselves know this, said G. Does it mean that they all know each other? Asked the same person again. How could it be otherwise? Asked G. Imagine that there are 2 or 3 people who are awake in the midst of a multitude of sleeping people. They will certainly know each other, but those who are asleep cannot know them. How many are they? We do not know, and we cannot know until we become like them. It has been clearly said before that each man can only see on the level of his own being. But 200 conscious people, if they existed and if they found it necessary and legitimate, could change the whole of life on earth. But either there are not enough of them, or they do not want to, or perhaps the time has not yet come, or perhaps other people are sleeping too soundly. We have approached the problems of esotericism. It was pointed out before, when we spoke about the history of humanity, that the life of humanity to which we belong is governed by forces proceeding from 2 different sources. First, planetary influences which act entirely mechanically and are received by the human masses as well as by individual people quite involuntarily and unconsciously. And then influences proceeding from inner circles of humanity whose existence and significance the vast majority of people do not suspect any more than they suspect planetary influences. The humanity to which we belong, namely the whole of historic and prehistoric humanity known to science and civilization, in reality constitutes only the outer circle of humanity within which there are several other circles. So that we can imagine the whole of humanity, known as well as unknown to us, as consisting, so to speak, of several concentric circles. The inner circle is called the esoteric. This circle consists of people who have attained the highest development possible for man, each one of whom possesses individuality in the fullest degree, that is to say, an indivisible I, all forms of consciousness possible for man, full control over these states of consciousness, the whole of knowledge possible for man, and a free and independent will. They cannot perform actions opposed to their understanding, or have an understanding which is not expressed by actions. At the same time, there can be no discords among them, no differences of understanding. Therefore, their activity is entirely coordinated and leads to one common aim without any kind of compulsion, because it is based upon a common and identical understanding. The next circle is called the mesoteric, that is to say, the middle. People who belong to this circle possess all the qualities possessed by the members of the esoteric circle, with the sole difference that their knowledge is of a more theoretical character. This refers, of course, to knowledge of a cosmic character. They know and understand many things which have not yet found expression in their actions. They know more than they do, but their understanding is precisely as exact as, and therefore precisely identical with, the understanding of the people of the esoteric circle. Between them there can be no discord, there can be no misunderstanding. One understands in the way they all understand, and all understand in the way one understands. But, as was said before, this understanding, compared with the understanding of the esoteric circle, is somewhat more theoretical. The third circle is called the exoteric, that is, the outer, because it is the outer circle of the inner part of humanity. The people who belong to this circle possess much of that which belongs to people of the esoteric and mesoteric circles, but their cosmic knowledge is of a more philosophical character, that is to say, it is more abstract than the knowledge of the mesoteric circle. A member of the mesoteric circle calculates, a member of the exoteric circle contemplates. Their understanding may not be expressed in actions, but there cannot be differences in understanding between them. What one understands, all the others understand. In literature which acknowledges the existence of esotericism, humanity is usually divided into 2 circles only, and the exoteric circle, as opposed to the esoteric, is called ordinary life. In reality, as we see, the exoteric circle is something very far from us and very high. For ordinary man, this is already esotericism. The outer circle is the circle of mechanical humanity to which we belong and which alone we know. The first sign of this circle is that among people who belong to it, there is not and there cannot be a common understanding. Everybody understands in his own way, and all differently. This circle is sometimes called the circle of the confusion of tongues, that is, the circle in which each one speaks in his own particular language, where no one understands another and takes no trouble to be understood. In this circle, mutual understanding between people is impossible, excepting in rare exceptional moments or in matters having no great significance and which are confined to the limits of the given being. If people belonging to this circle become conscious of this general lack of understanding and acquire a desire to understand and to be understood, then it means they have an unconscious tendency towards the inner circle, because mutual understanding begins only in the exoteric circle and is possible only there. But the consciousness of the lack of understanding usually comes to people in an altogether different form, and we can think about our modern culture and how subjective it is. Subjective people can believe they are whatever they want to be, and that's it. We can't question, you can't have a dialogue. There is no shared understanding. There is no objectiveness. It's all completely subjective, and whatever the person believes or feels, that's the truth for them. And that's the end of the argument. So this is very interesting with everything going on in today's world, especially like he's talking about the conscious leaders. If you think about the leaders of the free world and the famous world leaders, they're amongst the most unconscious, you could argue. So that the possibility for people to understand depends on the possibility of penetrating into the exoteric circle where understanding begins. If we imagine humanity in the form of 4 concentric circles, we can imagine 4 gates on the circumference of the third inner circle, that is, the exoteric circle, through which people of the mechanical circle can penetrate. These 4 gates correspond to the 4 ways described before. The first way is the way of the fakir, the way of people, number 1, of people of the physical body, instinctive, moving, sensory people, without much mind and without much heart. The second way is the way of the monk, the religious way, the way of people, number 2, that is, of emotional people. The mind and the body should not be too strong. The third way is the way of the yogi. This is the way of the mind, the way of people, number 3. The heart and the body must not be particularly strong, otherwise they may be a hindrance on this way. Besides these 3 ways, yet a 4th way exists, by which can go those who cannot go by any of the first 3 ways. The fundamental difference between the first 3 ways, that is, the way of the fakir, the way of the monk, and the way of the yogi, and the 4th way, consists in the fact that they are tied to permanent forms which have existed throughout long periods of history almost without change. At the basis of these institutions is religion. Where schools of yogis exist, they differ little outwardly from religious schools. And in different periods of history, various societies or orders of fakirs have existed in different countries, and they still exist. These 3 traditional ways are permanent ways within the limits of our historical period. 2,000 or 3,000 years ago there were yet other ways which no longer exist, and the ways now in existence were not so divided. They stood much closer to one another. The 4th way differs from the old and the new ways by the fact that it is never a permanent way. It has no definite forms, and there are no institutions connected with it. It appears and disappears, governed by some particular laws of its own. The 4th way is never without some work of a definite significance, is never without some undertaking around which and in connection with which it can alone exist. When this work is finished, that is to say, when the aim set before it has been accomplished, the 4th way disappears. That is, it disappears from the given place, disappears in its given form, continuing perhaps in another place in another form. Schools of the fourth way exist for the needs of the work which is being carried out in connection with the proposed undertaking. They never exist by themselves as schools for the purpose of education and instruction. Mechanical help cannot be required in any work of the fourth way. Only conscious work can be useful in the undertaking of the fourth way. Mechanical man cannot give conscious work. Mechanical man cannot give conscious work, so that the first task of the people who begin such work is to create conscious assistance. The work itself of schools of the fourth way can have very many forms and many meanings. In the midst of the ordinary conditions of life, the only chance a man has of finding a way is in the possibility of meeting with the beginning of work of this kind. But the chance of meeting with such work, as well as the possibility of profiting by this chance, depends upon many circumstances and conditions. The quicker a man grasps the aim of the work which is being executed, the quicker can he become useful to it, and the more will he be able to get from it for himself. But no matter what the fundamental aim of the work is, the schools continue to exist only while this work is going on. When the work is done, the schools close. The people who begin the work leave the stage. Those who have learned from them what was possible to learn and have reached the possibility of continuing on the way independently, beginning one form or another, their own personal work. But it happens sometimes that when the school closes, a number of people are left who were round about the work, who saw the outward aspect of it, and saw the whole of the work in this outward aspect. Having no doubts whatever of themselves or in the correctness of their conclusions and understanding, they decide to continue the work. To continue this work, they form new schools, teach people what they have themselves learned, and give them the same promises that they themselves received. All this, naturally, can only be outward imitation. But when we look back on history, it is almost impossible for us to distinguish where the real ends and where the imitation begins. Strictly speaking, almost everything we know about various kinds of occult, Masonic and alchemical schools refers to such imitation. We know practically nothing about real schools excepting the results of their work, and even that only if we are able to distinguish the results of real work from counterfeits and imitations. But such pseudo-esoteric systems also play their part in the work and activities of esoteric circles. Namely, they are the intermediaries between humanity, which is entirely immersed in the materialistic life, and schools, which are interested in the education of a certain number of people, as much for the purposes of their own existences as for the purposes of the work of a cosmic character which they may be carrying out. The very idea of esotericism, the idea of initiation, reaches people in most cases through pseudo-esoteric systems and schools. And if there were not these pseudo-esoteric schools, the vast majority of humanity would have no possibility whatever of hearing and learning of the existence of anything greater than life, because the truth in its pure form would be inaccessible to them. By reason of the many characteristics of man's being, particularly of the contemporary being, truth can only come to people in the form of a lie. Only in this form are they able to accept it. Only in this form are they able to digest and assimilate it. Truth undefiled would be for them indigestible food. Besides, a grain of truth in an unaltered form is sometimes found in pseudo-esoteric movements, in church religions, in occult and theosophical schools. It may be preserved in their writings, their rituals, their traditions, their conceptions of the hierarchy, their dogmas, and their rules. Esoteric schools, that is, not pseudo-esoteric schools, which perhaps exist in some countries of the East, are difficult to find because they exist there in the guise of ordinary monasteries and temples. Tibetan monasteries are usually built in the form of 4 concentric circles or 4 concentric courts divided by high walls. Indian temples, especially those in southern India, are built on the same plan but in the form of squares, one contained within the other. Worshippers usually have access to the first outer court, and sometimes, as an exception, persons of another religion, and Europeans. Access to the second court is for people of a certain caste only, or for those having special permission. Access to the third court is only for persons belonging to the temple, and access to the fourth is only for Brahmins and priests. Organizations of this kind, which, with minor variations, are everywhere in existence, enable esoteric schools to exist without being recognized. Out of dozens of monasteries, one is a school, but how is it to be recognized? If you get inside it, you will only be inside the first court. To the second court, only pupils have access. But this you do not know. You are told they belong to a special caste. As regards the third and fourth courts, you cannot even know anything about them. And you can, in fact, observe the same order in all temples, and until you are told you cannot distinguish an esoteric temple or monastery from an ordinary one. The idea of initiation, which reaches us through pseudo-esoteric systems, is also transmitted to us in a completely wrong form. The legends concerning the outward rites of initiation have been created out of the scraps of information we possess in regard to the ancient mysteries. The mysteries represented a special kind of way in which, side by side with a difficult and prolonged period of study, theatrical representations of a special kind were given, which depicted in allegorical forms the whole path of the evolution of man and the world. Transitions from one level of being to another were marked by ceremonies of presentation of a special kind, that is, initiation. But a change of being cannot be brought about by any rites. Rites can only mark an accomplished transition, and it is only in pseudo-esoteric systems in which there is nothing else except these rites that they begin to attribute to the rites an independent meaning. It is supposed that a rite, in being transformed into a sacrament, transmits or communicates certain forces to the initiate. This again relates to the psychology of an imitation way. There is not, nor can there be, any outward initiation. In reality, only self-initiation, self-presentation exists. Systems and schools can indicate methods and ways, but no system or school whatever can do for a man the work that he must do himself. Inner growth, a change of being, depend entirely upon the work which a man must do on himself. And so, that was chapter 15, and very interesting to review that after some time. I haven't read chapter 15 for a while, and it's clear to me that much of my views on religion come from the beginning bit, that religion is action. One must perform their religion, do their religion, and like Jesus said, he expanded and built upon the commandments of Moses and said that it's not enough to not covet thy neighbor's wife. You shouldn't even think about it. If you think about it in your mind, then you've already committed the sin. And also another thing, that because I first would have read this many, many years ago, sort of everything that I've learned moving forward has in a sense verified or helped to verify and helped me to understand this more fully. When I'm just going to share a few other works and other authors and teachers which I suppose offer the same concepts and theories and ideas as this. The first one is prehistoric Egypt, or Egypt before the Egypt that we understand and know, and the ones who built the pyramids. And I think it's in Meetings with Remarkable Men, Gurdjieff talks about, or in one of his other books, pre-sand Egypt. He talks about Egypt before the sands came, so tens of thousands of years ago. There's many theories about the Younger Dryas impact, and a big cataclysm happening 11,000 years ago where Atlantis fell, and many other things occurred. Excuse me. And if you read Graham Hancock's works, particularly Fingerprints of the Gods and Magicians of the Gods, his whole thesis is there was a civilization before the civilization that Orthodox archaeologists consider that, 10,000 years ago we became an agricultural society or culture, and then it grew, farming, groups of people, cities, and so on and so on. What Gurdjieff is alluding to is that there was a whole another civilization before this. And again, if you read the works of Graham Hancock, also Randall Carlson, and there's some other exponents of it, you can learn more about it. Also, Brian Murarescu's great book, The Immortality Key, he speaks about the origins of Christianity, and he argues, his thesis is that Christianity came out of the pagan worship of Dionysus and the Eleusinian mysteries. And if you read the book, The Immortality Key, he makes a very strong, very powerful argument for this fact. And if you're a Christian person, or maybe not a Christian person is the last person likely to consider what Brian Murarescu is saying. But if you're sort of a perennialist or a syncretist, someone who enjoys viewing all the religions of the world, it's a great book and I highly recommend it. I've read it multiple times and I'm due another reading, if I'm honest. And there's lots of other things there. The esoteric and exoteric, the fact that the world's leaders are unconscious and not leading the world to consciousness, taking us deeper into automation, mechanicalness and sleep. And there's just so much in that chapter that one can chew on, contemplate and consider in their own life and in the life of humanity that we're viewing and experiencing. But it's good to be back. I've been away for a few days, not done a live. Had an hour to today. I wanted to read that anyway, so I thought, here's the place to read it. I'll read it on here at Book Club. It's fantastic. We've now only got 3 chapters left, and I think we're going to read Gurdjieff's Meetings with Remarkable Men next. So that will give you a sort of a semi-autobiographical account of George Gurdjieff's life and some of the people that he met, the seekers of truth and all of these things. But for now, I'll say farewell. Thanks everyone for dropping in. We'll be back tomorrow night at 8 with Emma, continuation of Emma. So I look forward to that. It's good to be back. I hope you found some benefit of that, and let me know your thoughts. And if you want to hear more about any aspect, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you soon. Bye, guys.